It was one of those nights, out in the wilderness with the moon hanging high and the stars spread out like a blanket of glimmering jewels. I'd set up camp by the side of a tranquil lake, far away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The water was so calm it was like a polished mirror, reflecting the towering trees and the endless sky above. But let me tell you, that picture-perfect scene was about to take a turn for the unsettling. I had been wandering around, taking in the serenity of it all, when something peculiar caught my eye, a symbol etched into the bark of a nearby tree. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before, all twisted lines and sharp angles that seemed to dance with an eerie energy. It wasn't the symbol itself that made my skin prickle, though. It was the sensation that crawled up my spine when I saw it, a feeling of being watched, even though I was sure I was alone. Now, I'm no stranger to the great outdoors. I've spent enough time in the wild to recognize the usual sounds, the chirping crickets, the rustling leaves. But that night, as darkness crept in and the air turned thick with mystery, there was something different in the air. Whispers, soft and elusive, brushed against my ears like the secrets of the woods themselves. I strained to catch the words, but they slipped through my grasp, like trying to catch smoke in my hands. I can't deny that fear took a hold of me then. The woods that had felt so familiar suddenly became a labyrinth of uncertainty. I found myself drawn to that symbol, my curiosity warring with my instincts. It was as if it held some kind of power, an energy that pulsed beneath its surface, waiting to be unlocked. I stared at it for what felt like hours, lost in its maze of lines and curves, trying to make sense of it all. As the night wore on, the whispers faded, but the feeling of unease lingered like a shadow. It was as if the symbol and the woods were connected, like they were sharing a secret that I couldn't quite grasp. And in that moment, I realized that I was caught up in a story that was far older and darker than I could have imagined. It wasn't until I returned to civilization that the pieces started to fall into place. That symbol, it wasn't just a random etching on a tree. It was a mark tied to an old legend, a tale of vanished souls and unexplained disappearances that had plagued these woods for generations. And here I was, stumbling upon its traces, like an unwitting character in a story that had been etched into the very fabric of the forest. It was a camping trip, a getaway with my buddies that turned into a chilling experience we'll never forget. We set up camp in this remote spot, far away from the city. It was just us, the crackling fire, and the vast expanse of the wilderness. The stars were shining like they were showing off, and the night air was crisp and inviting. We were in for a good time, or so we thought. As we were swapping stories and roasting marshmallows, out of nowhere came this guy. Let's call him Jack. He had this friendly smile plastered on his face, all polite and charming. He asked if he could join us by the fire, said he was out hiking and got a bit lost. We figured, why not? The more the merrier, right? But here's where things took a turn for the eerie. Jack started asking questions, personal ones that had no business being asked to a bunch of strangers. He wanted to know where we were from, what we did for a living, even our plans for the rest of the trip. And every time he asked, his eyes had this weird glint, like he was trying to dig up something we didn't want to share. We brushed it off at first, thinking maybe he was just a curious guy. But then he kept showing up, at the campfire, on our hikes, even when we were fishing by the lake. It was like he was everywhere, always lurking on the edges of our group. And every time we tried to subtly distance ourselves, he found a way to worm his way back in. The air grew tense, and a feeling of unease settled over us like a heavy fog. We started whispering among ourselves, wondering if Jack was some kind of creep, or if he had more sinister intentions. I mean, who asks that many probing questions to strangers out in the middle of nowhere? One night, as we sat around the fire, Jack told us this chilling story, a tale of people who vanished in these very woods, leaving behind nothing but their empty tents. He spun it like some campfire ghost story, but his eyes gleamed with something that made our skin crawl. We exchanged nervous glances, each of us silently agreeing that it was time to get out of there. And so, we hatched a plan. In the dead of night, when the woods were at their darkest and eeriest, we packed up our gear as quietly as we could. We left the campfire smoldering, a final middle finger to whatever game Jack was playing. and with our hearts racing and our minds on high alert, we slipped away into the wilderness, leaving behind a campsite that had turned from a haven of fun to a pit of unease. We never saw Jack again after that, and I can't say if he was just a weird guy or something more dangerous. But I'll tell you one thing, that camping trip changed the way I look at the woods. Now, every time I hear a twig snap or a leaf rustle, I can't help but wonder if Jack's out there, watching and waiting, ready to probe and pry into the lives of unsuspecting campers. You know, sometimes life throws you a curveball that you just can't predict. And that's exactly what happened to us on what was supposed to be a fun and relaxing camping trip. But let me tell you, it turned into a nightmare that still gives me chills to this day. We had found this secluded spot, a little slice of nature's paradise far away from the city. The air was crisp, the trees stood tall and proud, and the only sounds were the occasional chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the wind. It was the perfect place to unwind and recharge. Things were going great. We had set up camp, started a fire, and were swapping stories and laughs. That is, until we heard it. A distant cry for help that cut through the tranquil night like a knife. We all froze, our heads turning to locate the source of the desperate plea. And there, stumbling out of the darkness, was a man. He was haggard and bleeding, his clothes torn and his eyes wide with fear. He collapsed at the edge of our camp, gasping for breath as he told us his story. He said he had been attacked by unknown assailants, left for dead in the wilderness. Our hearts went out to him, and without a second thought, we offered our assistance. But as the minutes turned into hours, something started feeling off. The man's behavior was strange, to say the least. He would jump at every sound, his eyes darting around like he was expecting danger from all sides. He kept asking us questions, rapid fire, like he was trying to figure us out. And the way he spoke, his words were jumbled, his sentences disconnected. It was like he was struggling to keep his thoughts straight. We exchanged worried glances, our initial sympathy giving way to suspicion. It was as if a fog had lifted, and we were finally seeing the situation for what it was. There was something about this guy, something that just didn't add up. We knew we had to be careful. So in the dead of night, when the fire had died down to embers and the moon hung low in the sky, we made a decision. Quietly, we packed up our gear and slipped away from our campsite, leaving the injured stranger behind. We didn't want to take any chances. We didn't want to become victims in whatever twisted game he might be playing. We found safety, and the next day, we reported the incident to the authorities. That's when we learned the truth. The man had a criminal history, a record of violence and manipulation. He had been wanted by the law, and we had narrowly escaped becoming a part of his dark story. And so, my friends, let this be a lesson. Not all that glitters in the moonlight is gold. Sometimes, the darkness hides more than we could ever imagine, and it's up to us to trust our instincts and protect ourselves from the shadows that lurk in the wild.